CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett joins us now with more from Hamburg, Germany. Major, the U.S. and Russian officials are giving two very differing accounts of President Trump's meeting with Vladimir Putin, particularly on the issue of election meddling. What are you learning?
Well, the key difference, Rena, and there were some similarities in both nations' description of the talks, but the key difference is the Russians say that when President Putin denied categorically any Russian meddling in the 2016 election, President Trump, quote unquote, accepted that. Now, that's open to interpretation. The U.S. officials don't say that at all. They say that President Trump acknowledged that answer, but that doesn't mean he believed it. And one of the things the Russians like to do in situations like this is offer their own interpretation that benefits them politically, and that could be what the Russians are doing right now. Clearly, the U.S. intelligence community will not, under any circumstances, accept blanket Russian denials that it had nothing to do with interfering in the 2016 election through cyber attacks or other means. The U.S. intelligence community at its highest levels has already concluded that Russia did precisely that. Not only did Russia engage in these never-before-seen cyber attacks, but that Vladimir Putin ordered those attacks himself. This is something the Russians will continue to deny. And I think, Rita, the most important aspect after this meeting occurred is that both the United States and the Russians said, well, we're going to agree to disagree, and then we're going to move on and deal with other issues. The most important aspect of that is that this unprecedented action undertaken by the Russians, according to the U.S. intelligence community, is not destabilizing in any significant way the Trump White House's willingness to deal with the Russian government led by Vladimir Putin, and that those relations are going to not only continue, but may in fact improve even in the face of this highly provocative act of espionage.
We also know Major President Trump met with both Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan and China's President Xi. Obviously, the topic of North Korea, clearly a big issue there. What do we expect to come from these meetings?
So it's important to note that while here, the administration has said a couple of things it hasn't said before about North Korea. It has said and repeated that it's a huge problem, has to be dealt with. But Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, said yesterday that the administration's approach, and this was a new phrase we'd never heard before, is a campaign of peaceful pressure, one that he said would take some period of time to work. Today, the president said there will be success achieved. It may take longer than I would like. It may take longer than President Xi of China would like, but success will be achieved. So in both those statements, the administration is giving a signal to the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Chinese that it is willing to allow diplomacy, sanctions, and other economic pressure take a toll, and it is not immediately considering any kind of military actions. There will be military tests. The United States, in concert with the South Koreans and the Japanese, flew fighter jets and a B-1 bomber in the general area over the weekend to send a signal to North Korea that it has plenty of military capability. So there's that sort of saber rattling. But the utterances here from not only the President and the Secretary of State clearly indicate, as we have been led to believe the Japanese and the South Koreans have urged, time for more diplomacy, time for more economic pressure, and not any swift consideration of a military option.
Major, it was also interesting to hear world leaders responding about climate change. Vladimir Putin says Russia will meet its obligations. Other world leaders have also said the same. Have other countries engaged the U.S. on President Trump's decision to back out of the deal? What are you hearing about that?
Absolutely. And the final statement, the formal terminology here at these summits is communique, but the final statement, usually drafted with tremendous involvement by the United States. The United States historically at these summits is sort of the leader in putting together this final statement. Under President Trump, the United States is an outlier. All other 19 nations here for the G20 summit agreed that the Paris Climate Accord is, in the words of that final statement, quote, irreversible, and that there is no means by which to renegotiate it. it is what it is, and the United States opting out of it makes it completely outside the consensus that was present before this summit and has been reaffirmed by all the summit participants to live up to the requirements and the protocols of the Paris Climate Accord to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by dates in the future. And those protocols call for greenhouse gas reductions that differ country by country. But all those signatories are still committed to it. The United States is not. The president said it's a bad deal for the United States, one that he would like to renegotiate, but the German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she doesn't believe any renegotiation is possible. And this communique, this final statement, certainly leaves the impression that the other 19 nations gathered here for this economic summit don't believe it's renegotiated. It will be renegotiated anytime soon or at all.
Major, is there any way of gauging that how everything that's happened at the G20 summit, from the talks with Putin to talks on North Korea, will play out politically back in the U.S.?
Well, the White House calculation, let's just take climate change, because we were talking about that just a moment ago, that for base Trump supporters, that's a win. Those base Trump supporters are skeptical, if not downright hostile, to international accords of all kinds. And they're skeptical of the whole climate change science and the ideology about the United States having to be at the head, at the forefront of greenhouse gas emission reductions, while India and China are allowed to take much more time and approach those greenhouse gas emissions much more slowly. So the White House believes that's a political winner for it, even though it is clearly not on the international stage. As to the reaction to the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, we don't know yet. Democrats were immediately critical, saying that the president didn't do anywhere near enough to confront the Russians over what Democrats and many Republicans regard as not just unprecedented, but highly hostile behavior by the Russians in the context of the 2016 presidential election. And the administration has made it very clear here, it's moving on. This is going to be an agree to disagree sort of issue, but much more important issues are to be discussed. And this White House is not going to dwell on the Russian election meddling issue at all. It's essentially settled as far as this administration is concerned. The political reaction to that in the United States, we have yet to fully measure. And on North Korea, the administration statements here clearly indicating it is going to take a more patient approach, a more diplomatic approach, take some of the heat off the idea that a military confrontation is on the immediate horizon. It clearly gives the administration some more time to develop what it hopes will be a more effective strategy with the Chinese, and maybe another set of options diplomatically to deter North Korea from what, by all accounts, it is racing toward as fast as it can. It already possesses nuclear weapons. What it wants is intercontinental ballistic missile technology that can threaten the United States with a deliverable nuclear weapon. This administration says that's intolerable. It will never be allowed to exist. And yet, in that context, here, the administration has made it somewhat clear it's willing to give diplomacy and economic pressure more time to deter that North Korean pursuit. And that's a big change from where we saw this administration talking about North Korea before it arrived here.
Major Garrett traveling with the president at the G20 in Germany. Thank you, Major.
Sure.